Good evening, Kanso. Welcome to the second session in our in our bid to celebrate and meet our objective as Legal Revelations Initiative for this particular anniversary that is coming on the 15th of November 2024. So today, which is the second session in the row, we'll be focusing on genital mutilation, specifically female genital mutilation in Zambia. And we'll be trying to understand how culture and the law interact with respect to female genital mutilation. What are the social, cultural dynamics that exist as far as this practice is concerned? And what does the law of Zambia really say about female genital mutilation? So those are some of the questions that we'll try to answer in this particular session. And to just get the ball rolling, please, you can confirm with either a sticker or whatever it is on your screen, whether you're able to hear me clearly so that I can get right into the lesson for the day. Am I audible? Is there anything that you would want me to work on? Okay. Thank you, Nimrod. Thank you, Precious. Okay. Awesome. Then I would take it that we are all set and I'm very audible. Now, I would like to hear from you. I'm sure you have done a little bit of background research about this practice and even just the definition, or maybe something that you've heard about it, a rumor, it could be whatever it is in that particular lane. Uh, what are some of the things that you've heard about female genital mutilations? Um, in general, it could be mere opinions, it could be rumors, whatever it is. What have you ever heard about female genital mutilation? So anybody can volunteer from the attendees to just give me an insight of what they think genital mutilation is and what they've heard about FGM or female genital mutilation. So anybody can volunteer. Yes. You can unmute yourself and go ahead, Precious. You can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, so what I've heard or what I understand by the term female genital mutilation, I think this refers to it could be the partial or total removal or alteration of a female's genital organs for some non-medical reasons. I don't know if they're medical or non-medical, but it's simply the removal of a female's genital organ. That's what I think.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for that contribution. We've taken it from the academic side. Uh, any other contribution from the team? Yes, Taonga, you may go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. From what I understand and from the few documentaries I've come across rather, I've come to understand female genital mutilation as it's been a practice in some certain cultures, whilst it's also got the aspect of it just being a practice in general. That yes, as Precious has already alluded and stated that it it's an alteration to the female genitalia or female reproductive organs for non-medical reasons, but others have when it comes to traditions, they believed they had a certain belief in relation to that rather. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that contribution. Unless there are other contributions that are available, I would like to get the ball rolling from there. Would we like to add a voice, Nimrod, Abigail? Uh, okay. Silence does not mean.
Hello.
Okay. Yes. You may go ahead.
Okay. So, also from my research, I learned that they usually perform it at the age of 4 to 14, and it also has some of a complication. They usually face some of the complications such as trauma, as well as they can have excessive bleeding. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for your contribution as well. Uh, so, what you've all said is what is actually in existence on the net. That is what is there in on the net, and to some extent, that is what is actually also there in practice. Now, in order for us to have a good understanding genital mutilation is, I will refer you to knowledge that has been confirmed that talks about this particular practice. But before we even get to female genital mutilation, we did say that this whole lecture revolves around culture and cultural practices. And that's because of this. I'll try as much as possible to show you the link that exists between culture and the law. Now, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and some other philosophers have in fact stated that the law is not an independent element, or law is not independent at all. It is intertwined with various disciplines. And amongst these disciplines that have been that the law is intertwined with, that it does not exist with without, that it does not exist without, includes norms that are agreed upon by the people, moral standards that they have set for themselves, and customs to that extent that they have chosen to uphold as that which is regulating them. And because of this, we're saying there's no demarcation whatsoever. You can't consider culture in independence. You can't consider law in independence with of culture. You can consider law in independence with ethics or morality. That is, well, that is a school of thought that exists in the legal sphere. But to be more precise, I'll get back to this particular notion when I now try to specifically address how culture has influenced the growth of the law as we know it in the general sense. Now, there are five myths that I want you to understand about female genital mutilation as we go on with this particular lesson. Five. It is mythical to consider female genital mutilation as religious. It is mythical to consider female genital mutilation as a white man's concept, or that it is regional. It is mythical to consider that it has health benefits. It is mythical to equally consider that it is only performed on adult women. And lastly, that it is mythical to consider that this particular practice has started. Okay, so this particular practice has started going down, or it is becoming less common. The reason as to why I consider these five as myths is because of this. Firstly, FGM in the first myth has no relation to religion, even though the practice, especially in the Arab regions, has been tied to religion. It has been tied to religion as a justification or an attempt to justify this particular practice. It has no relationship with religion. And the reason I say this is because there is no existing text from any religious order, whether it be Christianity, it be Hinduism, it be Islam. There is no text that verifies that this particular practice is religious. Thus, the first myth is debunked. Female genital mutilation is not religious. Others have stated that female genital mutilation is a white man's concept, or that it is regional. It is something that the whites brought up to control the minds of black men and women. It is not a white man's concept. In fact, if you trace the historical background of this act, it actually came from Africa before it went outside Africa and to these other continents. So it is African. It is not a white man's concept. Just because it is tied to it is tied to the promotion and protection of human rights. That's its prohibition is tied to the promotion and protection of human rights. A lot of people have stated it or have described it to be a white man's concept. Another way in which a white man is trying to control a black man. It is not a white man's concept. It is African. And it has sprayed through various channels into these other regions across the world. In fact, it's a global problem. It is a global problem. Every country, as we speak, is struggling and battling with female genital mutilation. I'll show you evidence later on of this particular notion. Otherwise, it is not a white man's concept and it is not regional. It is not only existing in Africa. It is not only existing in Zambia. It is not only in America. There are opinions that have been issued that this particular practice, us as Africans, we should not even associate ourselves with the conversation because it does not affect us. Neither is it tied to us. It is tied to the white man. But this is a misconception. It is a misconception because this particular practice is affecting Africa. It is affecting Zambia. It is affecting the globe as we know it. Thus, it is not a white man's concept and it is not a regional concept. Thirdly, it has health benefits. This has been spoken to by a lot of people, and if you try to talk about this particular issue, that is the justification that they will raise. They will tell you no, it has health benefits. But if you check the reports, go to the World Health Organization website, check on their reports on female genital mutilation, you will find that they have stated a lot of professionals from the medical side, those that are qualified, highly qualified publicists, highly qualified practitioners, have stated that there is no health benefit for female genital mutilation. It has no benefits whatsoever. Thus, the third myth is debunked. Fourthly, that it is only performed on adult women. This is a misconception. I remember Abigail's statement that it is performed on children as well. Children are involved. So it is not only on adult women, it is also performed on young girls, very, very young girls, as young as 6 years old. Of course, there's an age difference in with regards to when these practices are actually performed on children, but the most common is not 6. The most common is 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, because that is the time frame that a lot of cultures, especially those who use cultures as a justification for female genital mutilation, this is a time frame that they use to sort of usher the young child using this particular concept into womanhood. It is a rite of passage. It has existed as a rite of passage since the dawn of time, since we still accepted the practice in our cultures as a rite of passage. So within these years, such acts are performed. But not only that, even beyond these years, the act is performed on individuals who are not only adult men but adult women rather. They could equally be adolescents and teens who don't even know exactly what about what we're talking about, which is female genital mutilation, and this is attributable to the fact that the practice itself, the conversations surrounding the practice, are shrouded in silence. There has been a lot of silence that has been cast on the practice on the basis of or on the justification that that female genital mutilation, or talking about this particular topic, is a taboo. It is a taboo. It is considered as a taboo in Africa because you're talking about it. But because of this silence that has shrouded the practice, we've seen its prevalence, and not only that, we've seen its aftermath because of the silence that has shrouded the practice. So we can say that number four, female genital mutilation is not only performed on adults, and female genital mutilation has not become less common. If you look at the reports by uh, a lot of states, especially in Africa and other international organizations, they have declared themselves, that is with respect to states, as being free from the practice of female genital mutilation. And other organizations carrying out research related to female genital mutilation have equally come out to say, you know what, there's no female genital mutilation in Africa. There's no female genital mutilation in Zambia, but it is in existence. And I will endeavor to prove and to show you that indeed female genital mutilation, it is still with us, it is still affecting us, and it is still violating the rights of women and young girls. So now that we've got a glimpse of the myths that exist with regards to the practice, I did mention that I'll show you where the link actually is when it comes to the law and culture. I'll use the historical school of thought. There's an historical school of thought that exists, and this school of thought is principally created to sort of explain the relationship that is shared between history or the past and the law itself. Savini, who is a principal philosopher in this area of the law, justifies that the current position of the law is in fact a byproduct of past norms, past experience, influenced the law that we are currently being regulated by. That is theory. So to put it in one sense, what was being practiced before our time is what has influenced the nature and the status of the law that is regulating us. And because of this, even the practices, the cultural practices, the customs and traditions that we're being regulated by as a country, they're all as a result of what happened prior to this particular timeline. Now, at that point in time, you could clearly see that indeed culture has some influence when it comes to the creation of the law. And because of this, we ought to ask ourselves as to whether or not the influence that has been placed on us, or the influence that has been placed on the law itself as it currently exists, serves the interest of it serves the interest of the current community. One thing that I noted, in fact, from my training in civic education, I think that was some years back, by Mlea Muchindu. I remember her very well. She did explain and did state that when it comes to culture, one of the best components that can be seen from culture is that it is dynamic. And that means that it changes, it revolutionizes itself. It is very subject to change. That's the dynamics of culture. We're not refusing that, in fact, female genital mutilation is tied to culture. That is not that is not the point of the lecture. It is not the point of the lecture. It did exist. It did exist. It was practiced as a rite of passage. It is still being practiced as a rite of passage. The question that that we need to ask ourselves is this particular practice serving the interest of this society that we're living in, the modern society? And now we equally ought to ask ourselves, is this practice not only serving the interests of the society, but is it equally recognizing the value of both sexes who are in this particular region? Because that is what now brings in the issues of identity, issues of recognition, and so many other things that have been fought for by various feminists and supporters of feminists for the recognition of the rights of a woman in the society. Are these actions really recognizing those factors? And if they are really recognizing those factors, then they are okay. But are they equally taking into consideration various legal frameworks that we have picked as a people to regulate ourselves by? So we'll try to debunk and answer those questions so that you get some context when it comes to the female genital mutilation and legal regulation. Now, uh, when I ask the first question when it comes to female genital mutilation, uh, I think Precious gave us a definition of what it is, and this definition is the one that is provided for uh, by guidelines from the World Health Organization, that it includes the removal uh, or cutting of the female genitalia. It could be total, it could be partial, and this particular action is in fact done in ignorance of any justification, whether medical or not. And in most cases, it is done without consent. Now, that is a general definition of what the practice includes. But then, in order for us to really see how much we're impacted as a community when it comes to this practice, we equally need to understand what are the types, or what are what is the dichotomy of female genital mutilation. It is actually broken down into four. Pardon me for my pronunciations. I'm not a medical person, so I might pronounce these terms wrong, but they are clearly shown on the screen. So there is what is known as clitoridectomy. That is the first class. Now, with that particular class, it specifically deals with the removal of the clitoris. And the reason for the removal of the clitoris, just like the removal of any other part of the female genitalia, that a lot of people have in fact stated, those who practice it, those who fight against this movement to fight this practice, they usually say they remove uh, the clitoris in order to in order to reduce the sexual desires of the woman and to preserve her for marriage. So without sexual desires, or with reduced sexual desires, she's likely to be married off as a virgin. And that is the process. Now you can imagine the depth of that procedure, of literally removing a body part. So I'll let you think about it. I'll let you think about it, and how traumatizing that practice can actually be. So they remove the entire part. That's clitoridectomy. There is excision as well. So excision involves the removal of the clitoris and the labia. So the the creation of the female genitalia and its biological makeup, it has labia. You can Google this. You will find the images there, and they'll show you what labia is, if you're not aware, for the men. But for the women, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So excision now talks about the removal of the labia, that is the cutting off of that skin together with the clitoris. That's excision. And of course, like clitoridectomy, even here, the justification is they're trying to reduce sexual arousal so as to reserve virginity. So the labia in general is referred to as the lips that's around the vagina. So if you go into science, you're going to find that the manner and the way the female genitalia is created is that it has parts of it that resemble uh, the lips themselves. So when you're talking about excision, you're talking about the total or the partial removal of those lips themselves and the clitoris. Then there's infibulation. This one now does not only involve the removal of the clitoris and the labia. This one involves the sewing up of the vagina and the leaving of only a very small opening that only allows for the release of blood for menstruation and urine during excretion. That's infibulation. So they will sew up the vagina and only leave a small hole. Now, this process does not only end here. When now it is time for marriage, they will have to rip apart that sewed part of the vagina. And now, during the time that the female or the woman is now going into marriage, she would have experienced the two procedures, one for sewing up and the one for actually unsewing up or removing or making an opening. Because at the end of the day, the skin attaches to themselves and tissue is created there. So tissue will be literally split apart and there'll be a wound there. Now, the three that I've mentioned here are actually practiced here in Zambia as well. These are done in very remote places and they are not talked about a lot, but they are not common. They are common, or they have been common in Asian, or rather in Arabic states, those that practice Islam. They practice a lot of this, and also in the western and the eastern part of Africa. The three are very common. In Zambia, we have the last part, which is the unclassified part. The unclassified type of FGM includes several acts that are meant to, or that are done to make alterations to the female genitalia. It could be by prickling or by piercing. It could be scraping, and the most common part is the pulling. In this procedure, you will find that a lot of chemicals are actually used. Others bring about this procedure through using chemicals like acid. Others used the bent remains of a tire. Others use roots and leaves that are given to them by their parents or their aunties mostly, and so many other ways just to facilitate for that procedure. But if you follow through the reports that have been provided for just under the unclassified category of female genital mutilation, what is evident is that persons who undergo this procedure suffer from long-term post-traumatic disorder. They'll either have PTSD, they'll have anxiety, others develop depression, others even lose their sense of reaction. Sexual arousal literally goes, and that's making their sexual relations to be very difficult, even in the marriage. Others end up not actually being able to conceive because of the deformities that are actually done on the female genitalia. Now, I've talked a lot about female genital mutilation and what it is, and I've tried to the best of my knowledge to explain what it is exactly from a medical perspective. But then our interest is to see now how the law comes in, now to regulate or to try and put some regulations on this particular practice. I'll firstly start by addressing female genital mutilation from the international law perspective. Now, there are three levels that you need to understand when it comes to human rights protection. There's the international law protection or the international level protection. There's the regional level of protection, and there's the domestic level of protection. When we're talking about the international level of protection, we're talking about the globe as a whole. What does the globe say about female genital mutilation? And what comes up is that female genital mutilation is a violation of the human rights of women and girls. It is classified to be a form of discrimination, and it is frowned upon by various international rules and norms. There are various acts, or rather, let me call them statutes, sorry, not statutes, but international instruments that exist in the international realm, specifically for the prohibition of female genital mutilation. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of course, notwithstanding its status as a declaration, also has provisions that we will look to that speaks to female genital mutilation indirectly as well as directly. The Convention on the Elimination also referred to as the Women's Constitution. It is very instrumental and it contains explicit provisions that prohibit female genital mutilation. We have the ICCPR, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, expressly prohibiting female genital mutilation through the prohibition of torture or inhumane and degrading treatment. There is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which talks about the protection against discrimination and so many other areas, other areas in its preamble. The the United Nations Covenant on the Rights of a Child, or the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of a Child, equally provides for prohibitions. Now, let us get into the specific rights. The United Nations Declaration, the UDHR, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, freedoms that are set forth in the document without kind, which basically means that every person, every individual, whether you are a girl, you are a boy, you are a woman, you are a man, irrespective of your age, irrespective of your sex, irrespective of anything, you are supposed to be you're supposed to be given an opportunity to enjoy the rights and the freedoms that are set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you follow the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you'd find that it is recognized as being international customary law. But of course, it is not the entire document, but the document sets, in fact, a foundation for various regional and national human rights systems. More specifically, the right to life and physical integrity, including the freedom from violence, which is depicted under various provisions of the conventions that I cited, prohibit female genital mutilation. Article 1 and Article 3 of the UDHR, which recognizes personal integrity and also recognizes the promotion of this particular personal integrity, does speak to the notion of the right to life and physical integrity. It's very, very important. We also have Article 19 of the CRC, specifically prohibiting the subjugation or the subjection of a minor to acts that are severe or that severely impact their physical and the mental health. So that's going back to female genital mutilation. It has been proven, there's proof that FGM causes severe damage to the physical and the mental well-being of a child. And because of this, subjecting the child to these particular practices violates that particular protection. The rights to health is also a specific right that is violated as a result of female genital mutilation. Now, in order to carry out the act, there is a medical procedure that is undertaken. It could be considered to be a medical procedure despite it being rooted in culture or in customs. It is a medical procedure at the end of the day. So because of the existence of this medical procedure, the right to life, the right to health rather, always comes up. Now, is this particular right being appreciated? Of course not. Why? Because the right to health is dependent on various factors. Number one, the autonomy of the person. So the autonomy of the person, the right to informed consent, the right to the right information to make that particular decision to undergo the procedure. All these rights are actually violated because at the end of the day, there is no information that is given prior to this particular person making that decision. Aside from that, there are no procedural rules that are established to regulate the practice. That's in other situations where you'd find that this is actually being done in the form of a rite of passage and under culture and all that. Uh, young girls are actually taken to a site far away from home and they are taught about marriage, they're taught about this particular practice itself. And in the first attempt, they are actually forcefully pulled. They are forcefully pulled. That's their right to health is violated. And to the greatest extent, they are subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment. But specifically under the right to health, you can equally look into the the recommendations that were made uh, under under the CEDAW by the committee given or endowed with authority to oversee the implementation. Government should Okay. Apologies, colleagues. My network dropped me. So we can proceed. Yeah, so once you see the screen that is being shared, you can just give me a thumbs up to see whether we are all able to see. Are we all able to see? Okay, perfect. So in a nutshell, the rights to health, which is a fundamental right protected under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and so many other instruments, actually prohibit the practice of female genital mutilation. Because this particular practice results into severe physical and mental harm, it violates the right to health. Because the procedures that are undertaken, which involves issues of tissue, handling tissue, it could be blood, it could be the skin itself, without any medical expertise or regulation, that violates the right to health. And the committee that oversees the implementation of CEDAW did in fact remind states that they owe an obligation to ensure that health policies are put in place. Now, this particular obligation is not only to that extent, as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination under Article 5A does prohibit expressly the subjection of women to this type of discrimination, that is female genital mutilation. There was also rights of a child. Of course, this is principally regulated under the Convention on the Rights of a Child in the international sphere. There is, in fact, a requirement that all actions uh, that are taken by states, that is, member states of this convention, are done in the best interest of the child. That is, the interest that promotes the well-being of the child. And subjecting the child to these practices is not in the best interest of the child at all. So subjecting a person who's under the age of 18, this is specifically with regards to a child, to such practices as FGM is a violation of the Convention on the Rights of a Child. And specifically, governments are further told to abolish traditional practices or procedures that violate or that hinder the health of a child. That is under Article 24(4). Collectively, we're saying when it comes to a child, female genital mutilation violates the rights that are conferred on this particular child. And the rights are many, but more specifically, the right to health, the right to be protected against cruel and degrading treatment. These are violated by the practice that we are referring to as FGM. Now, there's not only a legal side in the international sphere, there's also a political side. And the political side is usually looked at from the perspective of the United Nations, more specifically with regards to the United Nations General Assembly. The General Assembly has sat down on multiple times when it comes to specifically discussing the issue of female genital mutilation. And on several occasions, they have in fact stated that these practices, in the political sense, are also considered to be a violation of the rights that have been elected by the international community to protect young girls and women. Aside from that, there is also a perpetuation of violence, which is prohibited under the international legal order. So, because states allow for these acts through not enacting sufficient legislation, through not taking positive steps in addressing female genital mutilation, there is a violation of their obligation at international law to ensure that violence against women is in fact dealt with, and it is dealt with rightly. Evidence of these narrations, these negotiations, these practices being labored as they have been is in fact evidently there. In 1998, the United Nations General Assembly resolutions and the Secretary General reports on traditional or customary practices affecting the health of women and girls, that is on September 10, 1998, in fact, talked to the idea of female genital mutilation and its elimination, its eradication, and its total obliteration from the member states, uh, or in their respective regions. And there are so many others, other negotiations that are of the same nature. So many other decisions that have been made in the political sense when it comes to the promotion of the right of a woman, or the rights of women as a whole. And in 2007, in fact, the United Nations General Assembly did remind states that there is a need for a collective move to be made by each state to ensure that women are not subjected for the purposes of customs, traditions, or on religious beliefs as excuses to these practices. There is a collective mandate that must be taken by all states to ensure the elimination of such kinds of violence against women and children. This is from the political sense. It's from the political sense. Now, how does the African region, as a region now, address the issue of female genital mutilation? So in Africa, we have various various instruments as well, human rights instruments that address female genital mutilation. We have what is known as the Banjul Charter, which was created in 1981. This is called the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Banjul Charter. We also have what is known as the Maputo Protocol, which is a recent instrument. This specifically is more like an addition to the Banjul Charter, but it specifically refers to the rights of women in Africa. We also have what is known as the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of a Child. Now, collectively, these documents address the issue of discrimination, the issue of equal existence in dignity and in person, the issue of the protection against inhumane and degrading treatment, issues of human rights with respect to the right to health, and also the prohibition of subjecting young children, or children to say, to cultural practices that violate these protections that I've mentioned earlier on. All of these is evident or evidence of what the region considers to be female genital mutilation and their approach. Their regional perspective is that it should be banned. And the instruments that I've mentioned here, in fact, reflect this particular status. Just to mention a few provisions, you can refer to Article 16 from the Banjul Charter. You would find that it in fact refers to the right of every individual to enjoy the best possible state of physical and mental health. And because female genital mutilation attacks this particular status, these statuses, it in fact means that this provision is violated. And specifically under the Maputo Protocol, you'd find that states are actually mandated to ensure that they adopt legislative, administrative, social, and economic measures that are necessary in the prevention, the punishment, and the eradication of all forms of violence against women and girls. And this is inclusive of female genital mutilation. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of a Child, or the African Charter, which was created in 1990, this one specifically just reflects the principles that are enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child. But more specifically, the Charter refers to an African child. The Charter mirrors the needs of an African child. And the needs are that they should not be subjected to such kinds of discriminatory treatment as female genital mutilation, and that their right to survival, their right to privacy, their rights to physical and mental and spiritual health are equally violated as a result of their subjection to these particular practices. Now, some of you might be thinking at this point that no, female genital mutilation is just an academic venture. You know, it's something that we need to discuss about as academias, or as people who are learning the law at this point, or learning whatever field that you're learning. It has no practical feel to it. Well, you're wrong. Quite recently, there are two decisions that I would like you to read later on after this particular session when it comes to female genital mutilation. R versus Amina Noor, which was decided this same year, it was decided in England, by the way. This same year, it related to Miss Amina or Miss Noor subjecting our own child, a 3-year-old, to female genital mutilation. So originally the two plus the husband were living in the United Kingdom. The child was born in the United Kingdom, and thus she was a united she was a citizen of the United Kingdom. But due to pressure, according to our statement, from the family and from the mother, and the threats that they issued, that she'll be cast out of the family or the clan from Kenya if she does not bring a child to be subjected to these practices. She acted under that particular notion and took a child for this procedure. The child was cut and she was sewed up, and then when she returned now when she returned to the United Kingdom, the husband made a complaint and she was arrested. And in fact, this very year is when she's starting to serve a 7-year sentence for subjecting her child or the child to such practices, as it is prohibited under Section 3 of the Female Genital Mutilation Act that is in England. Aside from that, we have a case here in Africa from Kenya, uh, Tata Kamau, this is the Attorney General, and others, which is a petition that was made in the Kenyan High Court concerning the constitutionality of the prohibition against female genital mutilation. The claim was that uh, female genital mutilation allows for various individuals or persons to exercise their cultural beliefs and all that. But to the greatest extent, that particular notion meant that uh, that is a prohibition meant that this right was actually being infringed on, and the Kenyan court disagreed with Dr. Kamau's conclusion or assessment or argument, and in fact stated that female genital mutilation is indeed a violation of the rights of the child. It is a violation of rights that cannot be derogated, like the right to be protected against inhumane and degrading treatment. And thus the petition was thrown out. Aside from that, you can look at what states are doing with respect to female genital mutilation. We have the Republic of Guinea, which enacted laws in 2016 specifically to address female genital mutilation. Even Zambia from 2011 up until now has been enacting legislation that has or that addresses female genital mutilation. The Gambia is the one which is the most recent now with a very strengthened piece of legislation that is meant to address female genital mutilation. This is practical proof that this is just not an academic topic. It is not just for academia. It is actually practice that is affecting us as a nation and as a continent. Now we come to domestic law. That is, what is Zambia's stance on female genital mutilation? Of course, we can't go anywhere without constitution. So Article 1 of the Constitution talks about supremacy of the Constitution, and it subjects all laws here in Zambia to the Constitution. And the Constitution itself, in fact, provides for various rights that are displayed on your screen right now. There's a right to dignity, life, inter alia. There's prohibition against degrading and inhumane treatment, the protection against discrimination, and these rights that I've mentioned here collectively in fact, can be used to impliedly address female genital mutilation, because this particular practice, in fact, infringes on directly on these particular rights. But something that you should take note of is the position of the Zambian law when it comes to culture and human rights. Article 23, clause 4D, allows for people or for sects to go into practicing customary laws even at the expense of another, which is justifiable as not being discrimination. But because of the very status of these acts, the very effects of the act, that is that it violates, for one, Article 15 of the Constitution. They are, in fact, or they can be considered to override this testification of the protection against discrimination in Zambia. Then we also have the Penal Code Act, and under the Penal Code Act, you can consider addressing female genital mutilation impliedly as well under common assault that is provided for under Section 2247, actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, but mostly common assault and assault occasioning actual bodily harm are in fact key provisions that you can use to address female genital mutilation. And this is because of the unconsented to interference with the body of another person, which has led to them suffering injury of some sort. So these are key legislative provisions that we can relate to. We also have the Anti-Gender Based Violence Act 2011, which specifically addresses female genital mutilation. And when you go to just Section 2 itself, the definition section in this particular act, you find there's a direct prohibition of female genital mutilation when the act defines physical, mental, or economic abuse. So abuse is inclusive of female genital mutilation. And to quote verbatim, the act defines physical, mental, or economic abuse as any act, omission, or behavior or threat of such act omission or behavior which results in death or is likely to result in the direct delivery from cultural customary rights or practices such as female genital mutilation. It is a specific reference, female genital mutilation, a very specific reference to female genital mutilation. And in fact, it is the very first time that we see this particular act being specifically coded to book by our legislation. So female genital mutilation is started from that. And now something that you also need to pay mind to, or just as a by the way comment, is that any interference with your person as a woman is in fact equally prohibited under the grounds that they're doing it for culture. There are cultures here in Zambia, I've done my research, that does what is known as a virginity test. So they'll either insert fingers or objects in the genitalia to determine how loose very sad that we can't find a solution because they don't talk about them. They don't. A lot of people are not talking about them. They're considering talking about it being a taboo and all that. And in the name of culture, there is this interference with your body without any of your consent. And even when consent is given, it is not freely given as it should be. And just as a formality, when you look at the decision that was made recently by the Court of Appeal in the Kachasu versus Manda and others decision, the court continuously, in fact, talked about a concept of parliament importance of parliament importance when it comes to medical procedures or any of such procedures that involves another person, and that is they have body autonomy. They can choose to subject themselves to such practices or not. The reason as to why it is being perpetuated is because there are no voices that are there, and even the women themselves who are victims are very quiet about the matter. They don't make their decisions when it comes to these practices. So it is a continuous problem. It is a very continuous problem. Aside from that, we also have the Gender Equality and Equity Act, which incorporates the women's constitution that we talked about, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and like it's the act that is giving it life, the instrument that is giving it life, it equally refers to female genital mutilation as being discriminatory, and thus a violation of the rights of a woman. And finally, we have the Children's Code Act, which specifically prohibits the female genital mutilation itself under Section 18 of the Act. So you can go to Section 18, you'll find female genital mutilation. They are being explicitly prohibited. So you can't subject the child to female genital mutilation. And there are principles that we've referred to already, such as the best interest of the child, the right to life and survival and development, and all those rights that are there for the child, for the protection of the child, rather. So you can't subject the child to cultural practices that affects them, either their mental, it could be their emotional, it could be their physical health. You can't subject them to such practices. Now, what are the challenges that are existing in terms of this practice? Because we've seen that as far as the law is concerned, there's sufficient legislation. So what are the challenges? I would like to pinpoint 4 challenges, but I'll focus more on addressing one that I think is very, very important. The others, I'll mention them as a by the way statement, but I want to focus on one, and that is the knowledge and the information gap that is in existence. I want you to look at 2 things before I go there. So what you're seeing right now is a report that was made by UNICEF, and UNICEF, in their calculations, as an overview report, in fact, stated in this document that there is no female genital mutilation in Zambia. That is what they're saying, 0%. Again, this is by a Tunisian organization. It says clearly there that female genital mutilation is reportedly not practiced in Zambia. Now, the reason as to why these statements are held by these bodies is because of this knowledge or the information gap that is in existence. To rebut their statements, they are reports that have been made with within Zambia that talks to the existence and the prevalence of these cases. Of course, there's need for more information to be there. In fact, there's need for a whole investigation to be done on the extent to which this practice is being done here in Zambia, despite the prohibitions and the violation and the, the consequences that will come as a result of these violations. Zanis released an article early this year on March 5th, 2024, and they stated that, in fact, in Muchinga, Eastern Province, and Northwestern Province, there has been a rampant rise in the number of FGM cases that are being reported to the Ministry of Development, rather. So there has been a rise. The United Nations Population Fund equally recorded an increase of over 69% of the practice being done between the ages of 15 to 49 of young girls and women, with over 49% of the countrywide rate is evidence of practice. So out of every 3 women, 2 have actually been subjected to such acts. It could be within their teen years, it could be within their young age and all that. So there is this information gap that is in existence. There's not a lot of people talking about female genital mutilation, and this is because of the silence that has been created over these acts, the silence that we have entertained as young people, to not raise our voices against this practice. And there's need for us to actually to stand up and raise our voices against female genital mutilation. There's also a legislative and policy gap. Uh, there are no national policies, that is, those ones that have been implemented by the government that are specifically referred to female genital mutilation. They are usually tied, or the practice is usually tied to cultural practices like child marriages. But there is need for us to have a specific policy that is addressing female genital mutilation in Zambia. And like our neighboring countries and other countries that exist in the world that are fighting female genital mutilation, like the United Nations, the United Kingdom rather, there is need for a specific legislation just addressing female genital mutilation, like the way they have a Female Genital Mutilations Act. There is need for that to be there. So this is a challenge as well, because without legislation, without policy, we do not have a direction as to how we're going to be fighting female genital mutilation. And we have to now rely on these other policies that are in existence to deal with these factors that are very, very important. There's also implementation inadequacies. So the implementation of the already existing legislation is also very, very shallow. We rarely see uh, cases. In fact, there are no records of cases that have been brought to the court's attention with regards to this act. And because, and to, in my opinion, I believe it is because of the silence that has been created in this regard. Then there's also no resources that are released for these ministries, like for example, the Ministry of Gender and Development, which is given a mandate to carry out investigations into such acts, or carry out workshops, to carry out seminars to talk about female genital mutilation and how we're going to address it as a country. So the resource mobilization is also a very big challenge that we need to look to. Now, what do I recommend can be done about what we're currently facing as challenges? Firstly, there's need for policy and legislative development. I think I've exhausted this point. And there's need for sensitization. A lot of people just go into the practice because they don't know. And even the ones that are taking them into the practice, they also don't know why they're doing it. They are doing it because their mothers did it, and because their aunties did it, and their grandmothers did it, and all that. And then just creates a chain of ignorance. A chain of ignorance without acting, without information, without reliable information on the acts that you're being subjected to. So there's need for more sensitization. There's need for more of such conversations to be had about female genital mutilation, and then we can see how we can move as a country, as a continent, on how to address female genital mutilation. There's also a need to leverage on these institutions that have been created by government, by the constitution rather, and through various acts of parliament. For example, the Human Rights Commission, the Gender Equality and Equity Commission. We can also leverage on the fast track court for the anti-gender based violence court, which is a fast track court specifically dealing with gender based violence. We can go to the children's court, which is a medium as well of enforcement of such practices. So we need to leverage on these institutions, because at the end of the day, there will be a need for us to take a positive step in ensuring that people who are culpable of these offenses are actually made accountable, and they are punished or prosecuted for those particular offenses. There's also a need for engagement of stakeholders in the fight against female genital mutilation. Uh, Traditional leaders, interest groups, non-government organizations, political parties, we all need to start talking about female genital mutilation. We need to be actively engaged in trying to inform, in trying to equip, and in trying to educate. Then there's also a need for us to change the perspective that we have of female genital mutilation as individuals. There's need for mindset change. And additionally, there's need for the creation of programs that are established for the provision of mental health intervention, and also the creation of safe spaces. There are quite a number of safe spaces actually in Zambia, some that have been regulated by the government. The government has over 7 safe spaces. I don't know if you knew this, but the government has seven safe spaces where people who are subjected to these practices or who are under threat of such scenarios and others can actually seek refuge from the government. They are under the control of social welfare. So these facilities, which are equally underfunded, there's need for more funding to be allocated to them so that they can cater or cover for a huge number. Aside from these, there's also other safe spaces that are run by non-government organizations. I know one that is run by the Young Women's Christian Association. They have one safe space that I know of that addresses or tries to help women and young girls who are under threat of being forced to do these practices. So there's need for us to take active steps in addressing these problems, and we'll only be able to address them if we take the route collectively. I'd like to leave you with this note, which is from and again, pardon my pronunciation, Ifra Hamid. She's a very loud uh, activist when it comes to female genital mutilation. She's Muslim by religion, and she's one of the few uh, widely recognized advocates who speak firmly against female genital mutilation. She says female genital mutilation is a silent killer, and indeed I agree with her because there's a lot of silence that is revolving around female genital mutilation, and there's need for us to actually pick up our mats and fight this particular practice. With that said, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will leave the floor open for questions or discussions or whatever it is. The floor is now very open. You can just open your mic and we can engage in conversations revolving around female genital mutilation. Are we here? Is everything clear? Okay, thank you, Rolisha. Okay, uh, Zenji, Nimrod, everything is clear. You can just give me a thumbs up if everything is clear. Okay. Okay. So thank you so much for attending the session. It was indeed a lively session for me, and I hope that you've learned one or two things from this particular session. If you'd like to, if you'd like to learn more about female genital mutilation, I have some recommended texts for you that you can look into. Of course, the statutes that I referred to, you can look into all of those statutes and get to appreciate this even more. And you can also look into these various works that have been done by persons of affluence when it comes to and persons who are actually very loud on female genital mutilation. And there are those articles that are available for you to read and to have a good understanding of female genital mutilation. So with that said, I wish you the best of luck and have a very good evening. You can now exit the group. Thank you for attending.